everyone! Today I'll be drawing a duckling using graphite, charcoal, and a little bit of ink. Throughout the drawing I use 3H, HB, and 6B pencils, and I use a medium and a hard charcoal. I use the 3H pencil for the sketching since it comes out nice and light and it's quite easy to erase. Then I usually use the HB when I start adding details and for base layers of shading. Then finally I'll use the 6B pencil for places that I want to have a nice dark shading. Then I use charcoal in the places with the most intense shading, which will come out solid black. To begin this drawing, I use the 3H pencil to do a quick sketch of the duckling's outer rim. I sketch the beak and then the outline of his head and neck area. I believe this is the most important part of your drawing, since if you mess up the sketch, your final drawing will also be messed up. So make sure to take your time and keep sketching until you're happy with the way that it looks. If you're unhappy with the way that your sketch comes out, I guarantee you won't be happy with your final drawing. So don't be afraid to take a long time during this sketching phase. I know that the final sketch won't look very impressive, but it is the most important part, so don't be embarrassed if it takes you a very long time to do the sketch part. As you can see, I erase a lot and go over it with my pencil again, since a lot of the times I'm not happy with the way that my sketch comes out initially. I'm a perfectionist when it comes to drawing, so I go back and erase a lot of times and go over it until I'm perfectly happy with it. I make sure that I love the sketch before I continue, otherwise I won't love my final drawing, and that's really important to me as an artist. So taking it back a little, I start off by shading the beak with a very thin layer of the 3H pencil that I blended out to make a nice smooth color. Then I go in and add a little bit more details onto the beak, such as the little nostrils and the lines that I know will be completely dark. You can see that I kind of outlined the outer rim of the beak because I know that I'm going to be coloring that in completely black with my charcoal. So I kind of mapped it out to begin with so that later on it can be a more smooth process and I know what I'm doing. The most important part of shading the beak is to make sure that you do it in layers. The layers begin with lighter shades and then you progressively get darker as you're getting closer to your final product. So to start off, I used the HB pencil to lightly map out my darker areas. I blended those out with my blending stump, and then I used my medium charcoal to fill in the black areas that I mapped out before on the outer rim. I make sure to be very careful and precise with the charcoal since it's very difficult to erase. Any little mistake could cost you the drawing, and I have done that before. In one of my projects in my art class, I used charcoal in a spot that wasn't really supposed to be there, and I had a very hard time erasing it. In the final product, you could still see the little area that I messed up on, but hopefully it's not too noticeable if you look at it. My teacher did like it, so there's no problems there, but I knew it was there and it really upset me. So, moral of the story, just make sure you're careful, and don't put a mark down with charcoal unless you know you want it there. Continuing on with the beak, I made the shading darker and darker progressively by layering charcoal over top of the graphite that I already had put down. In order to get the highlights, I used a very thin eraser to erase away the parts that I wanted to be solid white. They weren't going to come out solid white, I knew that from the start, because I had already put down some graphite and charcoal. But it did get light enough to make it look like a highlight, and that's what I was aiming for. I also cleaned up the areas around it a little bit by using a little ink pen for the little parts that I wanted to be solid black, but I couldn't quite fit in with my charcoal pencil, because I find it really difficult to get charcoal pencils to a really fine point, so the little details are really difficult to do with that. We can call it cheating, maybe not. I don't know, but I use an ink pen to get the little details that I need solid black. I think it's a good tactic, so I'm not going to call it cheating, but I guess that's up to you, huh? Speaking of ink, I used the ink pen for the entirety of the eyeball. In order to get those highlights, I used the white Jelly Roll pen that I use all the time on top of it to get the white highlights and made it look like a real eye. In the first stages, it looks pretty creepy since I colored the whole thing in solid black. But I promise you I'm not drawing a demon duck. It'll get better. Promise. Trust me. Although, as you may be able to tell, I had a little bit of difficulty with the white gel pen. I couldn't get it to go straight over the ink, so I had a little piece of paper on the side that I put the gel on from the pen. I just did a little scribble on a little white piece of paper, and then I took the tip of my pencil and coated it in the white gel, and then just dotted it onto the eye. This worked much better. And I'm not really sure why the white gel pen wouldn't come out on the ink, but it was just giving me a tough time, so we improvised. The next stage we are moving on to would be drawing the little fur on the duck, or fuzz, fur. I don't know if ducks have fur, but guess what, that's what we're drawing. For this, I just had a very, very sharp pencil. I believe this was either the 3H or the HB, and I just lightly made dashes across the page to make it look like fur. This was very, very lightly done, just to like fuzzy the outline, because we drew a very solid outline during the sketching phase, but I'm going over that with jagged edges so that you can see that the edge of a duck is fuzzy. We don't have flatline ducks in our world, so fuzzy up your edges with a pencil. I also used the 3H pencil to lightly shade in everything inside of the duck. Then I use a blending stub to blend that out to have a nice, solid, light color inside of our duck. Because the basis of our duck is not going to be white. The duck doesn't have white fur. It's going to be a light tinted gray. So we're just using the 3H as a nice base layer. In the reference picture I had of the duck, it had different patches of fuzz that were much darker than the others. So I was using the charcoal pencil to show which pieces were going to be darker and which pieces were going to stay lighter. To keep these areas of fur looking fuzzy and not completely flat, I used very thin flicks of my wrist to make little individual hairs. This process did take a while because I needed the whole thing to look fuzzy, so it is tedious, but it's very important. Because we're drawing a duckling, we don't have the flat feathers that would be easier to shade. We have the little fuzzes that I've been calling fur, but I know it's not actually fur. But this is what is on the little duckling as he's grown up. No feathers yet. To show more depth and shading throughout the duck's fuzz, not fur, I use the black charcoal pencil to do little individual black hairs throughout the lighter areas. I usually keep this closer to the dark areas and not just in the middle of nowhere, but it just shows that even the lighter areas of fuzz still have shaded parts. As we get more detailed, I use the 6B pencil and HB pencil to do the same thing that I was doing with the charcoal. I use them to make little individual fuzzes throughout the lighter fuzzy areas. I use the blending stump a lot to blend out some of the individual fuzzes that I make, just to show a more shaded area instead of just a fine line of dark gray or solid black. On the very edges of the duckling's head and neck, I use the charcoal to make little tiny fuzzes, just to show that there is shading behind the duck as well, and it's not all just this light color. I use the charcoal around the outer rim of the entire duck sketch. Now that our fuzzy duck head is finished, we move on to the fuzzy duck neck, which is all a light area of fuzz. We don't have the dark charcoal areas that we had in the head. So, to keep it looking fuzzy and realistic, we used the charcoal and the darker pencils to keep the duck looking fuzzy and realistic. Towards the left side of the duck's neck, I made the strokes longer to make the fuzzes look longer. Then on the right side, I made them a little bit shorter. The variation in fuzz length also gives you more of that realistic vibe to it. Since everything's not perfect in this world, and all the fuzzes are not going to be exactly the same length and look exactly the same in the exact part of the duck, right? That's not the way the world works. We're drawing a realistic looking duckling, so we gotta vary the sizes and lengths of our fuzzes. That doesn't sound professional at all, because I said fuzz about 16 times, but fuzzes! For the finishing details, I take out my very thin eraser again, and use the same little flicking motions that I did while drawing the fuzz on top of the fuzz to show more variation in the color and the length and all that fun stuff. It makes it look more 3D, like it pops out at you more. I do these little flicking motions with the white eraser all over the entire duck fur, where we have a base layer of gray. This base layer of gray allows us to use the eraser to make these little marks. If it was white to begin with, the eraser wouldn't do anything. So, in case you were wondering, that's why we made everything gray. And then in addition, I extended the neck a little bit farther down because I didn't think that there was enough area, and I wanted the bottom part of the duck to be more rounded instead of flattened off. So I added more gray to the bottom of the neck to extend it, and then just followed the same patterns that I was doing before with the little flicks of the fuzz and then the flicks of the eraser, and just made it all look the same as everything else. And finally, we are moving on to our background. This part is completely optional, so if you like the way that your duck looks already, don't worry about the background. I think backgrounds are kind of risky, to be honest, because if you mess up your background, then you kind of messed up your whole drawing. But no pressure, because you're going to see me do it first before you attempt anything, so don't worry. But for the background, I used all charcoal. I started with a charcoal pencil around the beak, and then I used a stick of charcoal all around the bottom of the neck, and then I blended that out with a blending stump. And then I just layered the background, so I layered more charcoal over that and blended that again, and then more charcoal until I was happy with the way that it looked. Now here we do get a little bit fancy, and this part is also optional, just like I said. Instead of using a regular pencil and, making little circles and then blending that out, I just used a paintbrush and some graphite powder that my very close friend gave to me. I'm not quite sure how expensive it is, but I highly recommend getting it if you're considering. It's a wonderful tool that I've used for backgrounds in a couple of my drawings, and it creates a nice, fine layer of any shade of gray, depending on how much powder you use. And it's super easy to apply. It just gets a little messy. I use a paintbrush, but I've also used my finger, which I know is kind of controversial because people believe that the oils in your finger could mess up your picture and all that fun stuff. But I do use a paintbrush in this one, and it's a wonderful tool. You can see me layering it a lot, and I don't really need to blend because by applying it with the paintbrush, it's already being blended. Wonderful. So as soon as that's finished, that is my final drawing of the duckling. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope that you learned something too. So, thank you all so much for watching, and have a great day! I'll see you all in the next video.